Good evening, everyone. I am D. Griffin Jones with Cult of Mac. They say everybody's a critic. Not everybody's a very good critic, but I can attest to this one. I am joined today by Russell Davis.
Hi, I'm Russell Davis, here to talk about, I believe, Ted Lasso.
We're going to be recapping seasons 1 and 2. You rewatched season 1.
I rewatched, yes, for this discussion, I rewatched all of season 1 and a couple episodes of season 2, about 3. I think it's a really solid piece of television and work. I think Sudeikis is at like the top of his game here, comedically, and I would say as like a physical performer almost too, to a degree. There's so much of that here, and I think the writing is fantastic. I think the characters are great, and I think it's just a really fun show to like get to dive into further.
Season 1 especially came out of nowhere. Like, here was this show that was based off of some ad series that NBC did years ago with Jason Sudeikis.
Yeah.
And it really caught everybody off guard. Nobody knew that it was going to be the sensation that it was. Nobody was expecting a weird sitcom on Apple TV to take the world by a storm.
I remember I was skeptical to watch it for a long time at first because, you know, the reputation was that it was kind of like another feel-good TV show.
It's a hard sell for a certain kind of person because at first I thought, oh, it's a sports show. I don't watch sports shows. I never watched like Friday Night Lights or anything like that. And I was like, oh, no. It's not just a sports show. It's like a really good feel-good show. Well, I don't really like shows like that either.
You know, it's not feel-good that's just kind of toxic positivity or whatever you want to call it. It actually is rooted in like a semi-realistic portrayal of trying to be a good person in a world that tends to not value that as its first priority. So in season 1, we open on Rebecca, and she's plotting this kind of revenge against her ex-husband with this club and with hiring Ted Lasso. And we're introduced to Ted. I think Ted's introduction, personally, is one of the best character introductions in any show ever. It's the video, the cell phone video of him chanting with his team. I think it says everything you know about Ted, that chant, the way they're doing it. And I also think the sportscasters...
I don't necessarily know that understanding is what we're doing.
Among other things, what the show does so well, consistently, I would say, across both seasons, is whether we're talking new character or just starting the show off as a whole, you know, anytime it has something new to show you, something new to introduce you to, or to really impress upon you, I think it really does a fantastic job of, like, introducing them and introducing those concepts, those ideas, those characters, this world.
Its introduction to Beard is in the same scene, though. Ted turns around to talk to Beard. They have like a little bit of banter. You get a little flavor of their friendship there, and right away you see that like Beard's like reading a sports book, which you see him doing throughout the entire series.
Ted tells Beard,
"If we see each other in our dreams, let's goof around a little bit, pretend like we don't know each other. You got it, stranger."
And like they're on that level of communication, I think. And I think that's so, I think it's hilarious as like just a thing to hear someone say in a sitcom and like some of their opening lines. And I think it says so much about Ted and so much about Beard. Going from Beard to later on, Roy and Jamie, and I like our introductions to them as well. You know, we're introduced to Roy, and what we are told about Roy, what he tells us about himself constantly throughout the series, is that he's kind of this like manly, macho type of guy. At least that's what he seems to, you know, give off, the vibe he wants to put out into the world. And yet, one of our first things we see of Roy is him sticking up for a teammate after, you know, Jamie is being a doofus and being annoying, which, you know, I mean, I think that says a lot about someone, and I think that says a lot about Roy as a character, and I think that makes Roy one of my personal favorite characters, along with just the fact that Brett Goldstein is just a fantastic actor. So you meet Rebecca, you meet Ted, you have that whole press conference in the first episode. I think one of the coolest things about season 1 is how Rebecca changes. Seeing Rebecca go from someone who is paying her assistant to dig up dirt on the coach.
She's especially cruel to Higgins as well. It's not just Ted. Ted is my way of destroying this team, and I'm going to make you help me do it. If somebody only sees the first 3 episodes of the show, they will not think that it is a feel-good show.
It's as feel-good in moments as it is relentlessly realistic about how sad life can get.
Let's talk about Jamie a little bit. So when we first meet Jamie, he's the other star of the team, and he knows it. And he's an absolute dickhead to everybody.
A part of this show that I don't hear talked about very often, I think, is how much it dwells on transformation. Like, and I hear a lot about, and it makes sense. I hear a lot about believe. I hear a lot about, the power of like self-esteem and all that stuff, and how it's kind of a commentary on that, and also about, Ted's mental health.
I'll contrast this to another sitcom, even a more recent example, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine or New Girl, where, yes, the characters learn lessons every episode, but it doesn't actually change their actions throughout the show. They still act the same way practically in every episode.
Long-form storytelling has taken us by storm, I would say. And I think Ted Lasso is an interesting example, an ensemble piece where the main reason you're watching is to see how the ensemble change. And I don't think that's typical.
So as we said, Rebecca starts off with this animosity towards Ted. She sets up a day-long interview with Trent Crimm that of course backfires on him as Ted charms Trent Crimm out of writing his hit piece.
Crimm understands that this really is unorthodox, and like that this is something that should be questioned. Like, why did you hire this man to play or to coach this team? I think for me, that's like a huge function of Trent Crimm. And another example of this show kind of understanding that in order to make a lot of this land, you need to ground Ted with characters who are skeptical of him.
What I love about that episode so much is that you can tell that right off the bat, Trent feels like he knows what he's in for. Like, he starts this day with Ted and he's like, really, you're letting the kick guy call the shots on these plays? And then they do this event where Ted goes over to a local high school and Trent's like, oh yeah, sure. The one day that I'm here doing this profile on you take me to a school where you're showing off your part in the community. I think that skepticism goes right up until like one of their last lines in their conversation when Ted says,
I really enjoyed getting to spend this time with you, Trent.
You actually mean that, don't you?
No.
That's the last gear that clicks in Trent Crimm's head that recontextualizes their whole day together.
I almost see that episode as a response to what they probably think the viewers are thinking at that point, right? Like it's to let you tag along with these two and have that same skepticism of Ted. He really is this nice, and I look like an asshole in his immediate vicinity just because I'm here. Like, you know what I mean? Just
because I'm acting like a normal person and Ted's acting like Ted.
Exactly.
I think you could really frame season 1 around all of the characters in Ted's vicinity falling like dominoes in Ted's favor. Like right from episode 1, we know Beard is coming with him. Episode 3 is when Trent gets on his side.
I agree. You know what I do think is an interesting counterpoint to that, though, is in watching the stuff about his divorce, watching him handle that. It's clear that someone out there, just for whatever reason, isn't quite as in love with Ted Lasso as the rest of the world seems to be.
Yeah, and arguably his wife is the person who knows him the best.
Well, yeah, and that's
which is an interesting perspective.
And I think that to me is what makes him such an interesting character and such a great character.
So I think the next domino to fall is Keely Jones. We meet Keely, and she's basically introduced as Jamie Tartt's side piece. And then in every conversation she has with Ted, you see that she is an equal mind to him. She's just as sharp. She's just as fast. She holds her own.
I think it's a great piece of character work just across the board from the standpoint of like watching it season wide. And then I think one of my personal favorite episodes and one of my personal favorite moments is watching Roy admit to Keely that he doesn't care about Jamie anymore, and watching her go around that little press room and switch from chair to chair and do that little routine with him. And part of why I love that is because, and it also says, yes, she can think on her feet and be funny and be, in the moment and immediate and quick-witted.
I think the next domino to fall after Keely is Roy. We see Ted and Beard almost conspire to push Roy's buttons. We see Jamie bullying Nate. Roy's early impression of Ted as like this happy-go-lucky guy. He comes to Ted and he's like, are you going to do anything about this? And we see him very intentionally say, nope. And that just boils over in Roy's head.
What I think is interesting about Roy as a contrast to kind of the usual Ted management style is, like you said, it is rare that we see Ted push instead of simply gently nudge.
Yeah, Ted wrangles Roy where he nudges everyone else.
Exactly.
Because he can tell that Roy isn't going to be nudged. That's a good segue into, I believe, one of the next episodes where Richmond is having a charity donation sort of auction to fundraise. And that is, I believe, when Ted sees Rupert. He sees Rupert. And this is the first time where Ted no longer gives someone the benefit of the doubt. He sees Rupert and he immediately knows the evil within him.
You're right. We do see him give that hope up. We see that leave him, and we see him, take Rupert on in a more direct confrontational way with that whole dart match later on in the season. I think most shows would have Ted best him in the bar, and then he's just out of the rest of the season. But you do see him again when Manchester loses, and you do sit with him for a second as his new wife, walks out of the room, and with the clear understanding being that Rupert is sad, and we do have to watch that.
A lesser show would frame that as the villain of the show being defeated, but that's
exactly.
not really what happens in Ted Lasso.
But the whole point of that first season, right? Like I agree with you. 100%.
The whole point of the first season is
the whole
saying
point of the first season,
really villains.
There aren't really
in real
villains.
Life.
Yeah, no, there are just people, and we're all trying.
That episode is also the episode where I think the Roy versus Jamie conflict comes to its head. We see Ted place Jamie and Roy immediately next to each other at the same table. And that's where you see the apex of Ted's influence start to have its effect on Roy. We see Roy give Jamie a second chance. We see them make up and have a perfectly mature conversation where they talk out their differences on their own accord. And I think from that moment on, you can say that Roy is thoroughly on Ted Lasso's side.
Or no, I agree with you. And I think so much of those first few episodes is about getting you as a viewer into the Ted Lasso mindset.
Right as Ted gets Jamie on his side, she releases his contract, so he goes back to Manchester City. I think this is the last time Rebecca does anything malicious in Ted's direction. Because this is a pretty late in the season move that she pulls.
One of my favorite things about Ted's reaction to learning of Rebecca's betrayal a little later, and the way that scene sticks on his face and stays with him in that close-up. There's a close-up that I just remember very well, and it sticks with me, and you watch him kind of process this information, and you watch Rebecca cry, and it kind of cuts back to her for a second, and then it cuts back to Ted again, and his response of, I forgive you. It's such a great example, I think, of writing and performance coming together to create a character.
It really speaks to how smart Ted Lasso writes its characters as real people, because this Rebecca revealing her betrayal to Ted comes after not only Ted goes through his own divorce and starts to have more regular panic attacks, but Rebecca sees Ted go through a panic attack, which she rescues him from. There's so much that happens in that scene that happens before that scene.
That incident that you mentioned where she assists him in that panic attack and helps him out of it, helps him get through that, actually comes, after they've traded away Jamie. It doesn't just halt, put a halt on Rebecca being our bad guy for the sake of turning us around on her. Stopping the movement of a human being is a little like stopping the movement of a train, emotionally speaking.
They're not just going to turn around when they learn one new factoid.
No, they're on a track. They've set themselves in motion.
Rebecca sees in the auction episode that Ted has her back, and it still takes her another.
It still takes her
episodes.
Another 3-4 episodes to fully get what that means and what that in a just and perfect world. But it isn't always that.
So let's talk about Nate. We're introduced to Nate very early in the show. He's basically just a kit boy. But as we said by episode 3, Ted sees in Nate some tactical genius.
I love watching Nate develop throughout the show. I love watching him go from this shy little character who's afraid to speak up to someone who trusts that his voice will be heard, even if he understands as much as anyone seems to that there will be a learning curve. And I love watching him stumble. Some of the early stumbles are just so they're wonderfully executed. They're so cute. I guess an example for me is the consistent overblowing of the whistle. Like at first,
yes,
just consistently being so eager to blow that thing and make it just everyone just ducking down for it.
I think a season 1 scene that a lot of people saw as like largely inconsequential and sort of comedic that ends up being much more important later on is that locker room scene. So Nate has these suggestions for the team that he sort of shyly passes along to Ted, like slipping it under the door. Ted looks it over and he says,
I can't say this to you.
But they need to hear it.
I agree. That's why you're going to do it.
And Nate's really shy and awkward about it, and we assume, that's just who he is. He goes to deliver his notes, and they're all just fucking brutal, just takedowns of every single player on the team.
I don't think it's a new observation to say that the quieter someone is, the more thoughts they're probably having. When he does offer up a thought, it does seem to be, if not immediately devalued, at least not taken very seriously. Watching him figure out that his voice does matter and that he can offer up an opinion and that sometimes it might even be the right one. One of my favorite things about the scene you mentioned, where he's laying into these people with absolute brutality and just savagery, is I think as an audience member, you've only been given fairly specific and fairly narrow amounts of information about each of these players. But
I think the characters' reactions to Nate's takes is what's meant to sell the audience that Nate is telling the truth here.
I think what's interesting to me about that scene, beyond the obvious, is that there's a reason that Ted can't say that stuff, but Nate can. They're all teenagers on the playground, right? Like we're all at recess in theory, right? Like Ted is the teacher. When the teacher comes over and says, "Stop picking on that kid, he doesn't like it," what do you immediately do when the teacher walks away? You pick on the kid some more. Whereas with Nate, he's new to this. He's just another kid coming over telling them don't pick on these people, right? Like not literally, but just he's another
might as well
kid.
Be one of them telling each
exactly
other the truth.
That's what I mean. So he knows he can let Nate unleash on these people a little more openly than he can. I guess now let's lead into the finale, or at least kind of inch ourselves closer toward there.
I think what's interesting about season 1, I mean, Ted Lasso says as much to Trent Krim. It's not about wins and losses. It's about making sure everybody can be the best they can be. And Ted doesn't get to have both. He's true to his word in, I think, more ways than anybody was hoping for. He makes sure Jamie is the best football player he can be, in that while he has his personal victory, the team loses their last match at tragically the last few minutes of the game, and Richmond are relegated.
You've been conditioned to think this is going to end on the happiest note possible, only for it to end arguably even sadder than it sets itself up for, because not only do we see Richmond lose, we see Richmond lose very specifically because Jamie takes it upon himself to make absolutely goddamn sure not only does Richmond lose and Jamie win, but to then see that scene where Jamie's dad is...
It's heartbreaking. It's genuinely heartbreaking.
He wouldn't be at the level that he's at in order to make that final play. Because, I mean, we do see that Ted's relentless optimism does get to Jamie, even though he is traded and even though he does make that final hit against Richmond count. You know what I mean? We know he grows more in season 2. But as far as season 1 is concerned, it ends with Jamie Tart getting absolutely eviscerated by his father for making a pass that won a game, still not being enough to satisfy this ungrateful garbage person.
So that's Ted Lasso season 1. Stick around for a recap on season 2, and eventually we might do another wrap-up on season 3 as well. I'm Griffin Jones. You can see more of our stuff here on the Cult of Mac YouTube channel. I have been joined by Russell Davis, who you can follow at VeryFunnyDoofus on Twitter. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.
Bye.